Welcome to another Study Skills webinar. I'm just guessing, but I think that most of the people who will be watching this series will be watching it because they are in the process of doing a thesis. They're presently writing, maybe it's a master's thesis. It may even be an honours thesis if you're an undergrad. It may be a master's thesis, or it may be a PhD thesis. That's just my suspicion, that most of you who will be watching this will be in the process of being formed as a scholar through doing a thesis of some sort. The disciplines that you do it in are going to differ, and therefore the formats are going to differ. You're probably going to be doing it at different universities, which have different guidelines. You'll be almost certainly studying under different scholars who have different preferences and bottom lines. Some people are going to be very rigid, very clear about what they want. Others are wanting you to explore and to be creative. But I just want to make a few comments about what I've noticed as some aspects of writing a thesis that many people have misunderstood or could do better. So I hope you find this helpful. As I said before, I think most of you, most of the people who are watching this webinar series are in the process of doing a thesis. I might be wrong, but that's my suspicion. Those of you who are not presently doing a thesis may be recently out of it and are wanting to begin to publish, perhaps with starting with your literature review or some of your theoretical ideas. And so the following webinar really is a summary of my personal analysis of what a thesis should be, what a thesis isn't, and what many people misunderstand about the task of writing a thesis. But I need to start by reminding you that the disciplines that one writes a thesis in vary greatly. Most of you who will be watching this will be in the humanities and the social sciences, and so we can just leave the hard sciences out there. But even between geography and history, social science, psychology, philosophy, there's an enormous range of what is required and expected or is possible in a thesis. And so you need to triangulate my opinions with what your supervisor says. Now, in the comments below, you will see that I have added another link to some books about thesis writing, and they are absolutely excellent. They make some very, very good points, and one of the most important points that everyone talks about is the importance of keeping a good relationship, keeping communication going with your supervisor. But you can read that yourself. So let's get started. One of the big things about a thesis that many people get wrong is they have an ill-defined research question. What is it that they are interested in? It can't be too broad. A research question should be narrow, but it should be deep. Now, many people forget that in the course of studying something narrow, in the course of telling this specific story, you are going to have the opportunity to learn about a wider story. But the wider story only provides the context for the specific story. And so some research questions, most research questions are too broad. Most research questions are ill-defined, and that is a very, very common dynamic. Everyone has their style, and my style is to be rigorous with the literature, and I'm putting the literature review immediately after the research question, but in a sense it could be put before it, because particularly in a PhD thesis, when you are expected to provide and present a new contribution to scholarship on a particular topic, how can you come up with a research question if you haven't read the literature? You don't want to get into a situation where you've spent a year working on a research question, reading the literature, to find that your area has already been adequately described by people who are already famous. And so literature reviews, I've mentioned aspects of those a number of times. I think that many of the skills that I've shown in terms of acquiring literature, organising literature, reading literature and annotating and highlighting literature, keeping a track of what you've done through a filing system, making sure you have EndNote libraries. I'm sure that if you do that, you will find a literature review a piece of cake. And even in the process of you doing your PhD thesis and your master's thesis, you can be writing book reviews for journals, you can be writing review essays for journals as well. Remember to start your reading with the most recent publications. You're going to impress your examiners and your supervisors if you are on top of the stuff that is coming out. And where will you hear about this? You may hear about it through academia.edu. I've already mentioned some blogs. The New Books Network will regularly during the week update with new blogs by authors about new books. I hope those are helpful. The disciplines that you are working in vary, but an important part of any thesis is collecting data. Data for an anthropologist looks different for a historian, which looks different from a psychologist. We have quantitative data, qualitative data. There are many, many differences, but we have to have stuff that we are analysing. And a big part of the journey through the doctoral tunnel, as I like to call it, is learning some very basic skills of how to collect, how to get, and how to organise the data that we are going to use to make our argument and to answer our questions. But we're not journalists. We're not just people who describe things. That's what journalists do. We're not journalists, we're scholars. And so an important part, another big part of any thesis, regardless of the discipline, is data analysis. We need to make sure that we get beyond description. And this is the role of theory. Generally speaking, most people would criticize if a thesis is inadequate. It is often because it is either you have insufficient data, so you haven't got enough stuff in order for you to develop a theory about or to say anything sensible. But the other big, common criticism, a common constructive criticism, is that there's too much description and there's not enough theory. Theory is to data what a lens is to a camera. At the back of a camera is a thing called a sensor, and it just records everything that the lens will tell it. So I have a fisheye lens, and my data will look certain ways. If I have a zoom lens, I will see the same thing, but in a very different way. And theory is like that. I can take a camera and I can put a Marxist theory on, I'm going to see certain things. I may put a postmodern lens on, I'm going to see the same data in a very different way. And so there are all sorts of ways for you to get up to speed with the theories in your particular area. And I refer back to earlier webinars where I talk about the importance of reference works, encyclopedias, and handbooks. Please make the use of those. Now, in the writing up and in the wrapping up, there are good ways to do a conclusion, and there are bad ways to do a conclusion. A conclusion, first and foremost, needs to be answering your research question. There needs to be a logical flow. The information that you present will be in the form of chapters, and usually these will be thematically organised, where you are introducing stuff and interrogating it. But it all has to feed back to the conclusion in which the research question will be answered. And so a conclusion is an answer to a question, but equally importantly, in a thesis which is rigorous, which is credible. You do more than just describe a phenomenon. You do more than just present your data. You have to have an argument. A good thesis and a good book will have an argument. I'm telling the story, and this is the big point, or these are the main points. So good theses have a clearly defined research question. They have a thorough literature review. They have enough data analysis which has been analysed. They put a theoretical lens on this analysis, because we're not journalists, we're meant to be scholars. We are people who are wanting to write something which will be fresh and new, and conclusions, and no matter what the discipline that the thesis is in, a conclusion has to answer a question, but it also has to make an argument. So I hope that you find those thoughts helpful. Remember, you'll see below some links to some books on writing a thesis. And so if that's what you're doing, good luck.